The citadel of Ironmere stood tall at the edge of the known world, where human stone met dragon sky. Its halls were wide enough for wings and its ceilings high enough for horns. It was built to impress, and it did. But not every corner of Ironmere was grand. Deep beneath the polished council chambers and the silk-draped guest quarters, there were other corridors. Narrow ones. Dim ones. The kind where pipes ran along the walls and torches flickered without ceremony. The kind where nobody important ever walked. That was where Grant worked. He had been a janitor at Ironmere for 11 years. He knew every crack in every floor. He knew which torch sputtered in the rain and which drain backed up after a heavy meal in the kitchens above. He was not a soldier. He was not a diplomat. He was the man with the mop, and he did his job without complaint and without much notice from anyone. That morning had started like every other. He filled his bucket, slung his mop over his shoulder, and moved through the lower corridors with the ease of long habit. The citadel was busy above him. He could hear the distant sound of boots on marble, the murmur of voices, the occasional deep rumble that shook the walls gently, the sound of dragons moving through the upper halls. The dragon delegation had arrived 2 days ago. Soraya was among them. She was a princess of the Ember Throne, third in line to one of the oldest dragon bloodlines in the world. She stood taller than most men on horseback, her scales the deep color of cooling ash with faint traces of gold along her jaw and the ridge of her wings. She was known for her composure. Her escort called her unshakable. Her father called her his steadiest daughter. But no one had seen her in nearly a full day. The truth was that Soraya had not eaten in 3 days. It had started as pride. The food offered at the welcome banquet had been prepared without the proper dragon spices, and accepting it felt like admitting that the humans had not prepared well enough. She told herself she would wait. She told herself she was fine. She told herself a princess of the Ember Throne did not show weakness in foreign halls. By the second day the hunger was a heavy thing sitting behind her ribs. By the third morning, her legs had begun to feel wrong beneath her. She had slipped away from her escort quietly, unwilling to let them see her struggle. She told herself she only needed a moment alone. She would find somewhere quiet and collect herself and return before anyone noticed. She had turned down one corridor, then another, moving deeper into the lower levels without meaning to. The air grew cooler. The torches thinned. The sounds of the citadel faded above her until there was only the faint drip of water and the distant echo of her own footsteps. Then her legs gave out. She did not fall dramatically. There was no crash of wings or crack of scale against stone. She simply slid down the wall, slowly, like something that had been holding itself up for too long and finally could not manage it anymore. Her back rested against the cold stone. Her wings folded tight. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. She told herself she would get up in a moment. She just needed a moment. The moment stretched. Her eyes grew heavy. She did not hear Grant coming until he was almost beside her. He had been moving down the far end of the corridor with his mop and bucket, humming something low under his breath when he stopped. He stood very still. He looked at the large shape slumped against the wall. He looked at the faint rise and fall of her chest. He looked at the ash-colored scales and the folded wings and the golden markings along her jaw. He set his bucket down quietly. He walked over slowly, the way a person walks when they do not want to startle something. He crouched down a few feet away and looked at her face. Her eyes were barely open. There was no fire in them. No sharpness. Just a dim and exhausted kind of awareness that told him she knew he was there but did not have the strength to react. He did not run. He did not shout for the guards. He did not stand there frozen by fear, though fear was certainly present, sitting in his chest like a cold stone. He reached into the worn cloth bag at his side and pulled out his lunch. It was nothing special. A thick roll of bread, a wrapped piece of salted meat, and a small cloth bundle of dried fruit that his neighbor had pressed into his hands that morning. It was everything he had brought for the day. He held it out toward her, close enough that she could smell it. Her nostrils moved. Her eyes opened a little more. He said nothing. He simply waited, crouched on the cold floor of a corridor that nobody important ever walked through, holding out his lunch to a dragon princess who had let herself starve rather than show anyone that she needed something. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and took it from his hand. He stayed where he was while she ate. He did not make a fuss. He did not stare. He looked at the wall across from them and listened to the faint sounds of the citadel far above, and he let her eat in peace. When the food was gone, she was breathing easier. She did not speak. He did not ask her to. He just picked up his mop and stayed close in case she needed anything else. For a long time neither of them spoke. Soraya sat against the cold stone wall with her wings folded close and her eyes fixed on the floor in front of her. The food was gone. The sharpest edge of the hunger had dulled. Her body felt less like it was folding inward on itself. But the shame had arrived to fill the space the hunger left behind, and it was not a small thing. Grant sat a few feet away on an overturned crate he had found near the wall. He was not watching her. He had his mop leaning against his knee and he was looking at nothing in particular, patient in the way that people are patient when they have spent years doing quiet work in quiet places. The corridor dripped. A torch flickered. Soraya spoke first. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. There was gravel in it and something that was trying very hard to be anger but kept slipping toward something else. She said she did not need his pity. Grant looked over at her. He did not seem offended. He nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they are filing information away rather than agreeing with it, and then he looked back at the wall. That made it worse somehow. She told him she was not some helpless creature. She told him she was a princess of the Ember Throne, third in the line of the oldest dragon bloodline still standing in the known world. She told him that she had trained in combat since she was old enough to hold her wings level, that she had negotiated treaties before human diplomats twice her age, that she had crossed the Ashen Mountains in a winter storm without stopping once. Grant listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not look impressed or unimpressed. He just listened with the same calm expression, elbow resting on his knee, eyes easy. She told him the food had been unnecessary, that she had simply needed a moment of rest and would have been fine on her own. He looked at her then. Not in a challenging way. Just a quiet, even look that lasted a second or two before he glanced away again. She felt heat rise along the back of her neck beneath her scales. She knew it was not true. She had known it the moment she took the bread from his hand. Her body had been past the point of simply needing rest. If he had walked past, if he had kept his head down and moved on the way most people would have, she did not know how long she would have stayed there on that floor. She did not want to think about it honestly because thinking about it honestly meant admitting something she was not ready to say out loud. So instead she got angry. She told him he had no right to sit there looking at her like that. She told him he was a floor sweeper in a corridor that nobody used, and he had no idea what it meant to carry the weight she carried. She told him that his kind gesture, whatever he thought it was, did not give him any standing over her. She told him she did not owe him anything for it. Her voice echoed off the stone walls. Grant waited until the echo died. Then he said quietly that he knew she did not owe him anything. She blinked. He said he had not given her the food because he expected something back. He said he had not stayed because he wanted credit. He said those things the same way he might describe the weather, plain and without decoration, as if they were simply facts about the world that did not require any particular emphasis. She stared at him. She asked him why then. Her voice came out different this time. The gravel was still there but the anger had lost its footing somewhere in the middle of her chest and she could not quite get it back. She asked him why he had stopped. Why he had not just kept walking. Why he had given away his own meal to someone who had just spent 10 minutes telling him she had not needed it. Grant was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone searching for the right words. More the quiet of someone deciding whether the true words were worth saying. Then he shrugged. It was a small shrug, the kind that sat comfortably on a person who was used to doing things without needing a reason beyond the obvious one. He said he could not walk past someone in need. That was all. He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world, which to him, clearly, it was. Soraya did not respond. She had prepared for many things in her life. She had prepared for political argument. She had prepared for aggression and for flattery and for the particular kind of manipulation that dressed itself up as kindness to get something in return. She had learned to read all of those things quickly and respond to them without hesitation. She had not prepared for this. There was nothing to push against. No angle to it. No hidden motive she could find no matter how carefully she looked. He had seen someone on the floor and stopped because that was what a person did when they saw someone on the floor. It was so simple it almost did not make sense to her, and the fact that it almost did not make sense to her told her something about herself that she did not entirely like. The anger finished leaving. There was nothing dramatic about it. It just went quietly the way the hunger had gone when she ate the bread. What was left behind was something much harder to sit with. She looked at the floor. Her voice when it came was lower than before. She told him his meal had been good. Grant nodded once. He said he was glad. Neither of them said anything after that for a while, but the silence had changed. It was softer now and neither of them seemed to mind it. Soraya did not sleep well that night. Her guest quarters were fine enough. The bed was large and the ceiling was high and someone had thought to leave the window open so the night air could move through the room. It was more than comfortable. It was the kind of room that asked nothing of the person sleeping in it. But she lay awake anyway, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a janitor in a dim corridor and a meal she had not deserved. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself it was a small thing, a minor incident, the kind of thing that happened and was forgotten. She was a princess of the Ember Throne. She had larger concerns. The summit was resuming in the morning. There were trade agreements to review and boundary lines to discuss, and her escort would be watching her every move for signs of weakness after her unexplained absence the day before. She had told them she had gone exploring. They had not fully believed her, but they had not pushed. That was the arrangement with royal escorts. They noticed everything and questioned very little, at least out loud. She closed her eyes. She thought about the shrug. That small, honest shrug and the words that came with it. He could not walk past someone in need. She was still thinking about it when the morning came. Grant arrived at the lower corridor earlier than usual. He had his bag over one shoulder and his mop in hand, and he moved through the dim hallway with the same unhurried pace as always. But the bag was heavier than yesterday. He had packed it carefully that morning before leaving his small room near the citadel's outer wall. He had not eaten breakfast. There had not been quite enough for both, and the choice had been simple in the way that his choices tended to be simple. Someone else needed it more. That was the beginning and the end of his thinking on the matter. He found Soraya already there. She was sitting near the same spot as yesterday, but differently this time. Not slumped. Not failing. She was sitting with her back straight and her wings folded neatly and her eyes open, watching the corridor entrance with an expression that was carefully arranged to look like she had not been waiting. She had been waiting. Grant stopped when he saw her. He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached into his bag and held out the food without making anything of it. Bread again, thicker this time. A portion of soft cheese wrapped in cloth. 2 apples and a handful of nuts that he had traded a spare candle for the evening before. Soraya looked at the food. Then she looked at him. She asked him why he had come back. He said he wanted to make sure she was all right. She asked him what he had brought for himself. He said he was fine. She looked at him carefully, the way she looked at diplomats when they were not saying the full truth, reading the small things, the slight pause, the way his eyes moved just briefly to the side. She had been trained to see those things, and she saw them now clearly. She told him to show her his bag. He looked like he might argue. Then he opened the bag and held it toward her. It was empty except for a small cloth and a spare lace for his boot. Nothing for himself. Not a single thing. Soraya was quiet for a long moment. She took the food from his hand slowly. She did not say anything right away because she did not trust what might come out if she opened her mouth too quickly. There was something pressing against the inside of her chest that was not anger and not hunger and not shame exactly, though it was related to shame in the way that rivers are related to rain. She ate. He sat on his crate and worked a loose thread on his sleeve and did not make her feel watched while she did it. When she finished, she told him, plainly and without decoration, that he was a fool. He smiled at that. Just slightly. He said probably. She told him that bringing his own food to feed someone else was not wisdom. She told him he needed to eat to do his work. She told him that no reasonable person gave away everything they had 2 days in a row with nothing kept back for themselves. He listened to all of it with the same patient expression he had worn the day before. When she finished, he said that she had needed it more and that he had managed fine. She wanted to argue further but found she did not have the words for it that would not circle back around and make her feel worse than she already did. So she stopped arguing. They sat together in the quiet corridor for a while, talking in the loose and wandering way of 2 people who have moved past the awkward part without quite noticing when it happened. He told her small things about the citadel, which pipes ran where, which hall flooded when it rained, which of the senior staff left their boots outside their doors at night. She told him small things about the Ember Throne, not the important things, not the political things, just small ones. What the mountains looked like at dawn. What her youngest sister was afraid of. What food she had actually wanted at the welcome banquet but had been too proud to ask for. He listened to all of it. Neither of them heard the footsteps until they were close. 3 members of her royal escort came around the corner in full formal dress, their expressions arranged in the particular way of people who had been sent to handle something uncomfortable and intended to handle it efficiently. They stopped when they saw Grant. The tallest one looked at him the way people look at something that has appeared somewhere it should not be. He was told, in very clear and level language, to stay away from the princess. He was told that his presence in this section of the corridor was noted and that it would be best for everyone if he returned to his assigned areas and did not seek further contact with members of the dragon delegation. Grant stood up from his crate. He picked up his mop. He looked at Soraya once, just briefly, and his expression was calm and without resentment. Then he nodded to the escort and walked away down the corridor without a word. Soraya watched him go. She said nothing. But her jaw was tight and her eyes were sharp, and the three members of her escort, who were very good at reading her, took a small collective step backward without meaning to. The escort made a mistake. It was not a large mistake in their minds. It was the kind of decision that people in their position made regularly, quietly, without much thought, because it seemed obvious and clean and correct. A janitor had been spending time near the princess. The janitor had been sent away. Problem handled. Matter closed. They did not understand what they had done. Soraya said nothing that evening. She attended the pre-summit dinner in the grand hall and sat in her assigned place and spoke when spoken to and smiled at the right moments. She was composed and correct, and her escort relaxed visibly as the evening went on. She seemed fine. She seemed like herself. She was not fine. She was thinking. There was something that lived at the center of dragon culture that outsiders rarely understood and that even fewer humans had ever witnessed firsthand. It was called the Kelvoran in the old tongue, which translated poorly into common speech but meant something close to the open naming. It was the act of standing before one's own people and speaking another person's name aloud in acknowledgement of what they had done. Not a thank you. Not a reward. Something much older and heavier than either of those things. Among dragonkind, the Kelvoran was not given lightly. It was not given for grand gestures or battlefield heroics or political favors. Those things had their own ceremonies. The Kelvoran was reserved for something specific. It was given when a person had shown you who they truly were, in a moment when they had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and had still chosen the right thing. It was the acknowledgement of genuine character. And once given, it could not be taken back. It was permanent in the way that very few things were permanent. It had been 3 generations since a member of the Ember Throne had given it to anyone outside of dragonkind. Soraya had made her decision before the dinner was halfway finished. The formal gathering of the dragon delegation took place the following morning in the wide upper hall that had been prepared for the summit. The elder dragons were there, 4 of them, ancient and heavy with authority, their scales dull with age and their eyes sharp with everything they had seen across their long lives. Her escort stood in full formal arrangement along the left wall. The human representatives were present as well, seated at the long table, waiting for proceedings to begin. Gran was also there. He had not been invited. He had simply arrived to clean the hall before the session began, as was his job, moving quietly along the far wall with his mop while the important people settled into their places. Nobody had thought to tell him to leave. Nobody had noticed him particularly. He was the janitor. He was part of the background of the room the way the torches and the stone floor were part of the background. He was finishing the far corner when Soraya walked in. She entered in full formal dress, which she rarely wore. The deep ceremonial collar of dark metal and amber that belonged to her rank. The formal arrangement of her wings, carried high and spread just slightly, which among dragons communicated significance the way a raised voice communicated significance among humans. Her escort straightened immediately. The elder dragons looked up. The human representatives shifted in their seats. She walked to the center of the hall. She did not walk to her seat. She walked to the center of the open floor, which was not where anyone was expecting her to go, and she stood there and let the room settle into silence. The eldest of the 4 elder dragons, a vast and weathered creature named in the old records as Doran of the First Ridge, watched her with eyes that had seen centuries of dragon ceremony. He recognized her posture. He recognized the formal wings. He recognized what was happening before she had spoken a single word. Something shifted in his ancient face that was not quite surprise but was the closest thing to it that a creature of his age and experience could still produce. Soraya turned to face the far corner of the hall. She looked at Grant. He had stopped mopping. He was standing very still with the mop handle in both hands, looking back at her, with the expression of someone who has just realized that something is happening but has not yet worked out what it is. She spoke his name. Not loudly but clearly, in the way that carried across stone halls without effort. She spoke it in the common tongue so that everyone in the room would understand exactly what she was saying. Then she spoke the words of the Kelvoran. They were old words. Simple words in the dragon tongue that even those who did not speak it seemed to feel the weight of when they were spoken correctly. She said them without breaking her gaze from his face. She said them the way they were meant to be said, fully and without hesitation, which was the only way they counted. The hall was completely silent. The elder dragons were still. Doran of the First Ridge had not moved. The escort along the left wall stood like people who had forgotten how to breathe. The human representatives looked at each other and then back at the center of the room and did not speak because they could feel that something significant was happening even if they could not name it precisely. Grant stood in the corner with his mop and looked at the princess in the center of the hall and did not fully understand the ceremony but understood enough. He understood that she had said his name in front of everyone. He understood that whatever she had said after it meant something real. He understood that she had done it deliberately and formally and in front of witnesses who would carry it forward. His expression did not do anything dramatic. He was not that kind of man. He just nodded once, slowly, the way he nodded when something was true and he wanted to acknowledge that it was true. Nobody in the hall said anything for a long moment. Nobody knew what to say. The silence in the hall did not last forever. It broke slowly, the way ice breaks at the end of winter, not all at once but in small pieces, a shift here and a murmur there, until the room was breathing again and people were looking at each other and then looking away and trying to arrange their faces into expressions that suggested they had not just witnessed something that none of them had expected to see in their lifetimes. The elder dragons recovered first. They were old enough to have seen many things and wise enough to know that the correct response to something they had not anticipated was not to make a fuss about it. Doran of the First Ridge straightened slowly in his place and looked at Soraya with something that was not quite approval but was leaning in that direction. He said nothing. He did not need to. His expression said enough. The escort recovered second. They stood along the wall with the careful stillness of people who were reassessing several decisions they had made recently and finding those decisions somewhat lacking in hindsight. The tallest one, the one who had spoken to Grant in the corridor, was looking at a point on the far wall with great concentration. The human representatives recovered last and least gracefully, whispering to each other behind their hands with wide eyes, but they recovered. Grant picked up his mop and finished the corner. It was not that he was unaffected. It was that he was the kind of person who, when affected by something, expressed it by returning quietly to the task in front of him rather than standing in the middle of the room letting it show. He finished the far corner, moved to the near wall, worked along it steadily, and when the hall was clean he collected his bucket and walked out through the side door without meeting anyone's eyes. But his jaw was set in a way it had not been set before, and his shoulders were straight, and anyone who had known him for a long time would have noticed that something had landed on him that morning that he was going to be carrying for a while. Not a bad thing. Just a real one. The summit resumed an hour later. Something had changed in the room and everyone could feel it even if no one said so directly. The elder dragons sat differently. The human representatives spoke more carefully, not out of fear but out of something closer to respect, the kind that arrives when you have seen something genuine and it has reminded you to be genuine in return. Soraya sat at the head of the dragon delegation with her formal collar still on and her wings still carried at the slight formal height and her expression clear and settled. She had come prepared. She had spent the previous evening drafting language that she intended to place before the council, and she had done it carefully, going over each word more than once, because she understood that the words in a treaty lived longer than the people who wrote them and she wanted these particular words to be right. When the session opened and the senior negotiator invited proposals for final additions to the treaty text, Soraya set her written draft on the table and spoke. She proposed a dignity clause. It was not complicated language. It did not need to be. It said plainly that human workers residing or laboring within dragon territories were to be recognized as persons of standing, that they could not be dismissed or displaced without cause, that their basic needs, food, shelter, fair rest, were the responsibility of whoever employed them, that any dragon lord or dragon authority who failed to meet these obligations could be brought before a joint council for review. She read it aloud in a clear and level voice. The room was quiet when she finished. One of the elder dragons, not Doran but a smaller and sharper one named in the records as Vel of the Eastern Reach, asked her what had prompted this addition. Soraya said that she had been reminded recently that the people who kept things running were often the ones least protected by the agreements of those above them. She said she found that to be an oversight worth correcting. Vel looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the draft. Then he made a sound low in his chest that among dragons indicated reluctant agreement and said nothing further. The debate that followed was not short. There were questions and there were counterpoints and there were two elder dragons who pushed back on specific language and wanted certain terms adjusted. Soraya answered each point steadily and adjusted what was reasonable to adjust and held firm on what was not. She was patient and she was precise, and by the time the session broke for the midday rest, the clause had been accepted with minor changes and was being written into the final treaty text by the scribes at the side table. It was done. Grant did not hear about it until the following morning. One of the kitchen workers told him while he was collecting his mop from the supply room, speaking quickly and with the kind of energy that comes with news that feels important and close. Grant listened to the whole thing. He asked one or two questions. Then he thanked the kitchen worker and went to start his corridor. He thought about it while he worked, Not in a complicated way. He was not a complicated thinker. He thought about it the way he thought about most things, plainly and without too much decoration. Someone had needed something. He had helped. Something good had come of it. That seemed right to him. That seemed like how things ought to work even if they did not always. He mopped the lower corridor the same as he always did. He checked the torch that sputtered in damp weather and straightened it on its bracket. He cleared a drain that had begun to slow near the east bend. But in the halls above him, something was different. The other workers in the citadel had heard. Word had moved through the kitchens and the laundry and the outer maintenance crews the way word always moved among people who worked with their hands, quickly and thoroughly and with feeling. They had heard that a princess of the dragon throne had stood before her entire court and spoken a janitor's name with honor. They had heard that a clause now existed in a formal treaty because of what had happened in a dim corridor over a simple meal. They did not fully understand all of it. But they understood enough. The cook who served breakfast that morning stood a little straighter behind her counter. The young laundry worker who usually kept her eyes down when dragon delegates passed through the hall kept them level instead. The old groundskeeper who had spent 30 years being looked through by visiting dignitaries nodded back when a junior dragon diplomat nodded at him, which had never happened before, and did not look away first. Small things. Quiet things. The kind of things that do not show up in treaty documents but are real nonetheless. Grant finished the lower corridor by mid-morning and moved on to the next one. He did not think of himself as someone who had changed anything. He was not built for that kind of thinking. He had shared a meal because someone needed it. Everything else had been Soraya's doing, her courage, her choice, her words spoken in front of people who would remember them. He was just the man with the mop. But somewhere in the citadel, in a hall that nobody important usually walked through, the torch he had straightened burned a little more steadily than it had the day before. And that, in its own small way, was enough.